Let's be real. Have you ever said yes to something and then immediately felt your entire nervous system file a complaint? Because I've been there. And I think this is one of the strangest things about boundaries. A lot of people do not struggle to know what they want to say. They struggle to say it without feeling like a terrible person. Because logically, you know you are allowed to say no. You know you cannot do everything. You know your time, energy, and peace matter too. But the moment you actually try to say no, suddenly your brain becomes a hostage negotiator. You start explaining, softening, apologizing, adding extra smiley faces, throwing in unnecessary details no one asked for. Not because you are unclear, but because you are trying to manage the other person's reaction. So if saying no makes you feel guilty, mean, selfish, or weirdly like you owe everyone a PowerPoint presentation, this video is for you. How do you say no in a way that is kind, clear, and honest without abandoning yourself in the process? Let's make this practical because I know just set boundaries is one of those phrases that sounds helpful until you actually have to use it with a real human who may sigh, guilt trip you, or suddenly act like your boundary was personally handcrafted to ruin their week. So here are the mindset shifts that make saying no much easier. And then I'll give you some actual ways to say it. First on the list, stop treating guilt like proof you're doing something wrong. This one is huge because a lot of people assume if I feel guilty, it must mean I'm being unfair. Well, necessarily. Sometimes guilt is not a moral signal. Sometimes it is just an old conditioning signal. Sometimes guilt does not mean you are wrong. It means you are doing something new. And new can feel uncomfortable, especially if you are used to earning safety through being agreeable. If you learned that being liked meant being low maintenance, or being good meant being useful, or being kind meant not upsetting anyone, then of course saying no feels bad at first. Not because it is bad, but because it interrupts an old pattern. And this is where a lot of people give up too early. Two, you do not need a courtroom level defense for your no. This might be one of the most freeing things to realize. A lot of us think a no has to be justified enough to be approved by a panel of judges. You need enough reasons, enough evidence, enough visible suffering. You practically want to submit exhibits. You do not need the perfect reason. You need honesty and clarity. Because over-explaining usually happens when you are not just communicating a decision. You are trying to make the other person feel about your decision. And that is where people get stuck. You say, I can't because I'm really tired, and this week has been a lot. And I also have this other thing, and maybe next time, and I feel bad. Now your no has become negotiable. Now the conversation is about your reasons. Now they can solve your reasons. Oh, it won't be long. You can come for just an hour. You always say you're tired. It's not that serious. See how fast this becomes a trap? Sometimes the cleanest no is the kindest one. Simple, respectful, done. The third tip, kind is not the same as over accommodating. You can be kind and still be clear. You can be warm and still have limits. You can care about people and still not be available for everything they want from you. Those things are not in conflict. But a lot of people have fused kindness with self-erasure. So the moment they choose themselves, it feels rude. But if your version of kindness always requires you to override your own needs, your own limits, or your own truth, then that is not kindness. That is compliance. And compliance might keep the peace for 5 minutes, but it usually creates internal chaos later. That is why saying no with self-respect matters. Because your relationships should not only work when you are self-abandoning. If someone can only enjoy you when you have no boundaries, that is not closeness. That is access. And access is not the same thing as love. For a good no does not have to sound harsh. This is the part I think people overcomplicate. They assume boundaries require a dramatic personality transplant. Like, now you have to become this cold, intimidating person. You do not. You can sound like yourself. You can be gentle. You can be respectful. You can be human. The goal is not to sound powerful. The goal is to be clear. So here are a few boundary phrases that work because they are simple. I'm not able to do that. Clean, no drama. I can't commit to that right now. Useful when you know you do not have the capacity. That doesn't work for me. Very helpful when someone is pushing a preference onto you. I'm going to pass, but thank you for thinking of me. Warm, clear, and finished. I don't have the bandwidth for that right now. Especially useful if you tend to say yes out of guilt. I'm not comfortable with that. Important when the issue is not logistics. It is your actual comfort or boundary. And if someone pushes, you do not need a new paragraph. You need a repeat. I understand, but I'm still not able to. I know it's inconvenient, but my answer is still no. I've given you my answer. That is where self-respect starts to sound different. Not louder, just steadier. 5. The guilt after saying no is where the real work begins. Because let's be honest, sometimes the hard part is not saying no in the moment. It is sitting with yourself after. It is the overthinking, the replaying, the urge to send a follow-up text explaining that you are not evil, just tired. After you say no, do not immediately ask, did they like my boundary? Ask, did I tell the truth? That is a much better question because boundaries are not successful because everyone applauds them. They are successful because they are honest, and that matters. Not every no will be received well. Some people will be disappointed, some will push, some will suddenly act like your boundary is a personality flaw. That does not automatically mean you did wrong. Sometimes your guilt is simply the discomfort of no longer performing endless availability. Let that be uncomfortable without turning it into evidence against yourself. 6. If you want to say no with less guilt, stop waiting to feel fully ready. A lot of people think, I'll start setting better boundaries once I feel more confident. Usually it happens the other way around. You feel more confident after you practice, after you survive the awkward pause, after you realize disappointment did not kill either of you. Confidence is often the result of self-respecting action, not the prerequisite for it. So if you are waiting to become someone who feels zero guilt, zero fear, zero discomfort before you start saying no, you may wait a very long time. But if you start messy, if you start shaky, if you start with one honest sentence said in your normal voice, that is where things begin to change. Here's a simple reframe you can use immediately. If saying no feels mean, try this. Instead of asking, how do I say no without upsetting anyone? Try asking, how do I tell the truth without being cruel? That is a completely different goal because the first question makes you responsible for everyone's feelings. The second question makes you responsible for your integrity. And integrity is much more sustainable than people pleasing. Remember, you are allowed to say no because it is true. That is reason enough. If this video resonated with you, do check out this video over here because it goes even deeper into boundaries, self-respect, and how to stop abandoning yourself just to keep the peace. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What kind of no is hardest for you to say? To work, to family, to friends, or in dating? Let me know.